Massacre. 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 Don't you love it? Yeah.
That's right. Welcome in. It is Massacre Radio. Back at it once again, bringing you episode 49. I, of course, am your host, Membersonly Dave. If you tuned in to hear somebody else, that's just too damn bad. Look, I'll just cut to the chase here. I had a nice summer off, but I could not wait to get back in the saddle and bring you broadcast excellence. That's kind of the standard around here for every show. And today I'm going to do exactly that. I have a lot to talk about with my guest today, Jason Sands. And if you've been listening to Massacre Radio with any regularity, then you know that we're big on disclosure, whistleblowers, the legacy program, all that stuff. So I'm real excited to have Jason on the program today. I'll stop flapping my gums and we can get right down to it. It is great to be back. I am ready to light this candle. It's Massacre Radio, baby. Yeah!
You're listening to Massacre Radio.
WKMA Cleveland.
Whoa! This is Radioland, huh?
An HD2 station.
I know what you're thinking. This is weird, huh? But I can handle it.
Welcome back. You're listening to Massacre Radio on WKMA Cleveland, an HD2 station. I'm going to go ahead and welcome in our guest on today's show, none other than Jason Sands. Jason, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you being here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. Normally I give her a little bit of background, but your background's kind of extensive. So just real quick for any of those who may not be aware, it says here that you served as a Master Sergeant in the Air Force. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I spent 22 years in the Air Force, retired in 2007, and for part of the mid area of my career, I also was part of the retrievals, or not retrievals, but the reverse engineering program that the Air Force has that involves Dreamland. Pretty strange things happen.
And it goes on here and says, afterwards, you were in Intel, and in your own words, you said that things went strange. It's a little mysterious there, Jason. What exactly was strange? What can you tell me about it?
Well, everybody knows about Dreamland and how, they're involved with the UFO phenomena and everything. So just getting to be part of the program was kind of a big deal for me. I felt very honored, and I still do. I still have some good friends that are in the program that are working away, being good patriots, and I'm proud of those guys as well. So, some of the strange things were just my job was to, monitor the telephones, monitor all the different telecommunication types, to assess the security of the program. And sometimes we'd go to different locations where it was, the program's being run out of, the different labs all around the country and around the world. So we went to a lot of different places to do these assessments. And we got to hear some really strange things. After about a year of doing that, I did it for 3 years, but the first year you get a really good idea that this is a really big deal. And there's a lot of strange things that are also going on in the laboratories and at the different locations, and all these kinds of things were going on. So, very strange.
Another interesting thing that I read was you were in the program. How were you, Jason, introduced into the program? What can you tell me about the inner workings and maybe how that came to be?
Well, I just finished my tour of duty in Germany, and I came into Nellis Air Force Base for my next tour, and I just kind of got to be friends with some of the guys there in the organization. And I didn't know it at the time, but they were already in the program. So I just started working there, and within the first 6 months or so, I got approached by some of these friends of mine, and they said, we'd like to invite you to, come work with us, but you're going to have to take a polygraph, and then we can tell you a little bit more about what this is all about. So there was no paperwork involved until after I got read in, where I had to sign, the pieces of paper that, I knew what I was doing. I knew how to protect the information I would be exposed to and all that. So I took the polygraph, passed it, and then we flew into Dreamland. And that was a really big day for me. It was really awesome. Got to see some really cool stuff there. And the head of the base commander actually took me on a tour around the entire base. So it was really nice that day flying in and out of there. But that was kind of how it all happened. So no paperwork. It was more like a hand-picked job where they had their eye on me, I guess, somehow. And they liked my analytical capability or something about me, made them want to ask me to join them.
I want to go back to the monitoring communications thing. You kind of touched on it there. In the past, you've talked about an incident where you overheard a conversation between two military bases where it's claimed that aliens were present during testing. I mean, what did you hear? What is that all about? What can you tell me?
It was just a normal work day for me. You just kind of capturing phone calls. And then this one came in where this one gentleman was describing, I think it was a scientist or an engineer or a lab technician, I don't know what. But he was talking to another person that sounded like he was not familiar with how the lab setup goes. And that's when this really strange conversation occurred, because the guy who had the experience in the lab was telling this newer person about how to set up the lab to do it correctly. And that's when the topic of tall whites and grays came up. And that really just threw me. I actually called my friends over because there's only 4 people on the team. They all came over and listened to it after I finished my recording of the conversation. But they were talking about a lab where tall whites would come in. They would set up the experiment that was going on in this lab. Then the humans would come in, but only after the tall whites would leave. So they're definitely talking about 2 different races here. We're talking about humans and tall whites. These were not code words. So then after the humans are done doing the test, then the grays would come in and kind of clean up and repeat the laboratory environment for the next test. So that was what I heard, and nobody could figure out, what it was. And then later on, I find out that there's this guy, Mr. Charles Hall, that was the weatherman out there, and he also talks about tall whites. I listened to his video, and I was like, holy crap, this is what this was about. These are the entities that are actually working with us. So that's what happened that day.
Now, some folks, Jason, they claim that whole thing was just a misunderstanding and that maybe alien was a code word. What do you think about all the skepticism as far as that's concerned? What do you say to those detractors?
Well, code words are built in a very confined way. It's not something you just throw around. It's like I don't see any code words that are called tall whites and grays. That's never been something. They come up with other names like rainbow chest or something like that, or farming boxes. It's just really strange stuff like that. It's never tall whites or grays. Usually it's a 2-word combo. So the grays definitely sticks out in that regard. Grays is not a code word at all. Tall whites likewise are not a code word either, because the context of the conversation was that the humans would come in when they were supposed to. So they were talking about the humans were actually different than these tall whites and grays, and that's where I knew there was a distinction being made in that phone call. So I did have Congress, somebody when I gave my testimony back in 2022, they mentioned that as well, and I just flat out told them that no, that was not the context of the call and what I had heard. They were talking about races of beings going in and out of this lab. This was not a code word at all.
Jason, I wanted to ask you about an encounter you had in 1994, with a non-human entity, pale blue and earless, communicating telepathically. Walk us through that. What was that like?
After I got read out of the program in 1994, which was earlier in the year, I think January, February timeframe, we have my other job that I did for the Air Force was just training air crews on how to survive in a wartime environment. And we operated out of the Black Mountain, which there's a building on top of that, Black Mountain, we called the schoolhouse. That's where we had some equipment that would jam radio signals, and that's what we used to train the air crews so that, they could fight through the jamming and still get their bombs on target. So that was kind of what we did. We did a lot of training with the air crews. So we were up range about half the year, about 180 days was average to go up range and train the air crews. So this one day, we're up there, and this was following a week after a video had been taken, which eventually got leaked out to the press sometime later. But everybody in your audience should know that it's out there. It's on the internet. And if you search on the Nellis Test Range UFO incident of 1994, it'll pull up the video of the craft that came onto the Nellis Test Range the week before I went up. So that video's out there. You can see the craft. Nobody's been able to explain it. You got, other people that just don't want to believe it, but that video is there. There's a good deal of analysis already put onto it. So we get in the convoy from the hotel, start driving up to Black Mountain, and the first thing we had to do is make a stop at what we called the cantonment area, which is just really a place where you can gas up your vehicles, change out a flat tire, that kind of thing. And then we went into this, what we called a Quonset hut. And in the back there, that's where the video operators that monitor the Nellis Test Range were sitting. Our ranking person who was there the previous weekend and actually seen the UFO wanted us to review the tapes with the video operator. And the video operator showed us the exact same tape that's out there on the internet that everybody else can see. And he asked us, were you here last week? If you were, please annotate as such, but I'm going to write your names down on a piece of paper. So everybody wrote their names down on a piece of paper. It was about 10 to 15 of us all together that watched this video and verified whether we had seen it the week before or whether we had not seen it. So anyways, we're exiting from watching this video, which I thought was very weird. I honestly was like, I have never seen anything like that. You're talking to a guy and a whole team of individuals that have literally seen everything that flies from both our inventory and also our allies. So this didn't fit anything we had ever seen flying on the test range. So that was unique. And then as I'm exiting, this lady who was sitting in a chair suddenly stood up and kind of pulled me up a little bit and said, hey, there's somebody on the range and don't talk to anybody. Just go, don't talk to him. And I was like, gee, thanks, strange lady. I don't know why you're freaked out about this, but okay. So we all get in the vehicles, we start convoying again. And we get down the road about a mile, somewhere between half a mile. And we're traveling towards Quartz Mountain at this point. We're heading off to Quartz on the dirt roads, and we get hailed by this person on the side of the road. He's wearing military battle dress uniform, just like us, and he looks like he's running funny, like he's going to fall over. As we get a little bit closer, I could tell that he had this slight blue tint to his skin. It was not bright blue like some people have said. That heard the story, but he had like an albino white kind of a skin with a blue tint to it. Mm-hmm. And I began to think, oh crap, this guy is hypothermic because this was October, wintertime. It gets really cold in the desert. And I was thinking this guy's dying, So I'm telling the driver, slow down, we need to stop. I'm trying to get my jacket off. And as we get to the point where this individual is near the front of the car, the guy in the passenger seat in the front, he screams out, he's got no ears. And I just thought, holy crap, this is really not the time to be rude. And I really thought it was inappropriate, but I was opening the door. And
Jason, I hate to stop you there, but they're giving me the signal. I got to go to a commercial break. Can you please hang on? All right, you're listening to Massacre Radio on WKMA Cleveland and HD2 station. We'll be back with more from my guest, Jason Sands, after this. Massacre. Próximamente después del espectáculo, has establecido una nueva conexión romántica y las cosas van bien, hasta que casualmente menciona a una novia. ¿Es ella una lesbiana a la que simplemente le encanta la polla? La respuesta a eso y todos los misterios del amor siguiente, justo aquí en WKMA Cleveland, una estación 102.
Inside of you, there are two wolves. And they're both listening to Massacre Radio, only on WKMA, Cleveland, and HD2 station.
Yeah, southbound. It's moving fast. Did you stop it?
I don't know. Right up high now. It's going like straight up. It's moving, isn't it? I don't even know what it is.
We're back, and you're listening to Massacre Radio on WKMA Cleveland and HD2 station. My guest today is Jason Sands. And Jason, I apologize. Before the break, you were talking about an encounter you had in 1994 with a non-human entity. You recognized that maybe it had no ears. What happened next?
I set foot onto the roadway, closed the door, and I looked up, and indeed, this guy had no ears. And I then noticed his eyes, which really shocked me even more. And they were like twice as big as anybody's I've ever seen. And that's when I got really scared. But then he starts talking to me, and that calmed me down. It was an audible language, but it was not English. It was some other language. But for some reason, I could understand all of the words. So there had to be some kind of a telepathic understanding of what he was saying going into my mind. It's just kind of like the process of, if we're talking now as we're doing now, I'm attaching meaning at kind of an emotional level before I speak the words and articulate, what I've got. And the same thing when you listen, you're attaching the meaning that I'm speaking to you. Right. So it's more of at a very base emotional level of understanding. So that's why I think I understood his language.
What was that conversation like? I mean, here you are face to face with a being with no ears and, giant eyes. I'm sure that wasn't comfortable. What can you tell me about the conversation and maybe the reasons as to why they were even there in the first place?
His ship is damaged, or his craft is damaged, which I could see. If just looking to my left, I could see the craft that was resting on the desert floor, and it indeed looked exactly like the craft that's in the video that's on the internet. I could see that was there, and I was looking over at it after he mentioned that it was needed repaired, and he's like, I need tritium or tritium or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, are you talking titanium? I'm like, or he's like, no, it's not titanium. And I was like, well, I started, in my mind thinking, well, how could I help him? And then I thought, well, I used to work for Dreamland, so I pointed to the Groom Lake Mountain Range, and I said, those guys probably have more exotic materials and metals that might be able to help you out. And then this wave of emotion hits me, and I feel disgusted. And I'm like, why am I feeling disgusted? And then I realized this wasn't me. It was coming from him. And I could actually telepathically feel his emotion of disgust. And then he says to me telepathically, I'm not going to talk to them. They're murderers and barbarians. So I was like, oh, crap, this guy's had a bad time with these people. So, and I started really not knowing what to do at that point. I said, well, I'm taking college classes with a geophysical professor down in Las Vegas, college, the community college, and maybe he has a metallurgist friend, and he just didn't say goodbye or anything. But I think he was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea or something. And he just walks off the road to his craft, and he takes off in the craft. I look over at my friends. They look like they're zombies, like their minds have been blanked out or something. But it almost made me laugh because they look so silly. And then I got back in the car, and off he goes. And then as he's flying over the roadway out down south from where we were at, that's when my friends all seemed to come to. It was really strange because they didn't want to talk about it, or they didn't remember the event at all for the day. And besides that, we were kind of late getting our systems up for the day because we had the pilots were waiting for us to get all of our equipment warmed up for the day. So we had to get up to Black Mountain. We didn't have much time to talk and discuss what had just happened. And besides that, I don't think they even knew what happened. So we took off and we did our work and we went home for the day. That was kind of how it was. And I just kept my silence about it because it was so strange. In that day and age, the 80s, 90s, you could literally lose your clearance if somebody thought that you were being a nutcase about UFOs and stuff. So I just kept my mouth shut. Gotcha. And that's pretty much how it went down.
Jason Sands is my guest today on Massacre Radio. You said it was speaking to you telepathically. How did the voice sound in your mind, and what did it feel like? Did it give you any unusual sensations maybe? Could you tell if it was maybe male or female, that sort of thing?
Definitely a male presence in the mindset. When we were talking, we shared that. I knew he was a guy or a man. It didn't feel bad. I had no headache, no dizziness. Felt very natural. I would say, though, that the feelings that I felt like they were in me as well as him at the same time. So we shared a lot of this emotional level of understanding of each other. But the other thing was like there was this feeling from him that was so much more organized in thought and control, civility, respect, peacefulness. All of this was coming from him. And I felt like such a freaking mess because my mind was, going between wanting to run away from fear and then coming back into the conversation and trying to respond to him. And I just felt like a mess. I felt like I had no control compared to what his mindset was. He was totally content and relaxed about it. Here I was kind of all scatterbrained and emotionally, going from one extreme to another. So that's what it felt like.
Did it seem agitated at all, or was it being patient? What was the overall demeanor? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I don't. Well, thinking back to that, when he asked me questions, he respectfully waited for me to respond. Whether he was annoyed about how long it took for me to articulate words with my mouth, I don't know. But I'd never detected a single drop of disrespect from him. But yeah, I bet you he probably understood what I was going to say before I said it. So yeah, because you think faster than you can speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, if he is telepathic from the day he was born, I'm sure he could think much, much quicker than I ever could. So yeah, I imagine he had some inkling of what I was going to say before I even said it.
Talk about what the aircraft looked like that this being rode off on. To me, it looks like kind of like a motorcycle gas tank with horns sort of on the side.
Correct. Yeah, the ram's horns were on both sides of what you're calling the gas tank, yes. And that's where the cockpit is also. Then on the very back, there's like this round egg-shaped pancake that's black, where if it was a helicopter, that's where the tail rotor would be. So, yeah, the front was like a gas tank, like you said. It was about, I think, grand total, maybe 25 feet long from tip to tail. And it stood a little over maybe 12, 15 feet. So I don't know. Maybe I got them all wrong. Maybe 20 or more feet long, definitely. But when he got in the cockpit, you could see that there were 2 seats in it, and he got in the first seat, which I assume was like the pilot's chair or something. Yeah, the ram's horns were another thing that, they went all the way from the top and curved around to the front of the craft of that gas tank, and then the tips of the horns were what was resting on the desert floor. And that's what the craft was resting on, it like a helicopter's skids. How the skids on a helicopter are parallel. That's what the ram's horns did. So they kind of were like landing gear for the craft.
You mentioned that you don't really talk about the incident with other folks, but what's this about one of the people you were with that day that they've been missing ever since?
Oh, yeah. Well, other people may not know this either, but I was in the program, and through the course of going through and being part of the film that James Fox put out, which is what I was doing at the time in 2022, 2023 timeframe. And that's when I guess people were searching for other people in the convoy. So I reached out, I got a hold of the driver, then he ghosted me when I started mentioning the UFO incident. And then the guy in the passenger seat, they tried looking him up, and nobody can seem to find him, so he might have disappeared. And then there was a third person in the vehicle, and that person, I think, got contacted, but they were too scared to come forward.
I want to get to your congressional testimony, Jason. Just talk a little bit about what that experience was like and maybe your feelings about testifying and blowing the whistle, as it were.
Right. So it was a fairly long process, actually. I was, on the top secret network. They've got not a database, but a forum where the UAP task force would have intel folks. They're not actually members of the task force, but they're just analysts that are looking at stuff for the task force. That's what I was doing, and going through all the different responses about some of the imagery that was coming in. And one day somebody posted this Nellis Test Range UFO incident of 1994, and I'm like, oh, I know about this, but this only tells like half the story. I mean, I fought with myself for about probably a good couple of weeks at least, and then I finally came out and said to the rest of the community on that forum, there's more to this. And I just wrote a good paragraph or two about the incident that I just told you guys and your followers and listeners. It really riled up the community. And then David Grush and another individual called me up, asked that, we needed to have an interview, a high-level interview with UAP Task Force, which is where David Grush was working at the time. And I said, sure. So we had a good couple of conversations. And then later on in the year, I guess, David thought it was moot for me to go, or it was important for me to go to testify. And he set me up to do that anonymously and quietly. So here I was in Hawaii at the time, and I get a call from one of the committee members, and they asked me if I would come testify in Washington, D.C. And I said, sure, I think it's important.
So why is it, Jason, you think it was so important for you to testify in the end?
To me, there's a great deal of risk, because you're talking about very exotic material. You're talking about first contact with other beings. And if the Roswell account is true, then we've treated them quite badly. So I think there's a level of risk in the program that people are kind of just brushing to the side, and they need to understand at some point, there's probably going to be some sort of justice for what we've done to these people, and not returned all the this exotic material and the biologics back to who owns it or is related to these pilots that have ended up in a bad way here on our planet. To me, that was a big risk factor, because the program people might actually have some retribution doled out to them by these beings that really don't like what's happened. And the second thing was, I did see some news articles from what Herrera had mentioned about Indonesia, and that there was a triangular craft, and they were loading up people into the back of it. And I knew what that triangular craft was. That was something that I was aware of from being in the program. I think the military just came out with an announcement that, that there is a TR-3B that they use, and that's what I'm referring to. So I was thinking, holy crap, if they're loading people into the back of this, TR-3B or whatever, this is bad. This is like human trafficking bad. And I was like, what on earth have they gotten themselves into? And that was another reason I felt a strong compunction to come forward and tell Congress. But when I was at Congress, I had 10 talking points that I thought that, here's the facts, here's the names, locations, things that will help you in your investigation. But eventually, after about 3 or 4 of my items, we would always end up talking about, fantastical stuff, because they were just so shocked at what I had to say.
So from beginning to end, how long did the whole thing take? Was it multiple days, or was it a couple hours?
It was a very long day. It was about a full, 7 hours of interviews or giving testimony both on the House side and the Senate side. And that's how it came down. But that's why I was motivated to come to them. They invited me to give testimony. I said yes. And that's how it all went down. So I went into the closed session or classified session with them and told them all the facts that I thought I had concerns about. And then I find out later, through David Grush, that there's a bunch of other whistleblowers, and they state pretty much the same thing I was. And I think it's kind of unique, because I don't know any of these other whistleblowers. And it just boggles my mind that these are people that also hold very high clearances, have gone through polygraphs, just like myself. People with very high credibility, and all of a sudden we don't even know each other, and we have the same concerns. I think that's very telling.
Jason, in your testimony, what did you say about the role of non-human intelligence in the legacy program you were a part of, and how did Congress respond?
Well, that was a part where I just told them, yes, this is concerning to me, because these people are, I already had told them what the program name was, and they all looked at each other like, I've never heard that name. So that shocked me to begin with. I'm like, holy crap, they don't even know who this program name. So that was the first big shock. And then the second thing was just when I started talking about, like you're saying, the laboratory environment and everything else, we got into a conversation where, if the humans aren't allowed in the labs, that to me is just a very small leap of logic to go to the point of saying they don't really like us very much, or they don't want to work on our weapon systems.
Right.
So whatever communication we have with them in the program, it's not this free-for-all technical exchange. It's very controlled, very managed, and that's exactly the way it sounded on those phone calls when I was on the mission.
Jason, you mentioned the name David Grush. How did your collaboration with him influence the information that you chose to disclose to Congress about the program?
He didn't tell me anything about what I should say or shouldn't say. He was just facilitating, and, he's a really great guy. He's got integrity up, sky-high integrity. And he just was very gracious with me, and he just wanted to make sure that Congress was being given, everything that they could to do an investigation. So he didn't really control me or anything like that. As a matter of fact, I kind of controlled myself, because I was like, well, I'm going to Capitol Hill here. I'm not going to talk about little green men and shiny objects.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where the conversation went anyway, because of how shocked they were. But we got through it all, and we got to all the main points and the details of, names, places, and all this good stuff. So they got the information they needed from me. But we also had these kind of sidebars and all this very, very strange stuff.
Were there any discussions about specific crash retrieval operations beyond the 1994 incident? And if so, are there any details you can provide?
Yeah, I did, and I did provide that to them. Those are classified. I think Jake Barber's probably got his own renditions of retrievals that he's been part of. And he's a new whistleblower. If everybody in your audience doesn't know, he came out, I think, February, and he's a retrieval guy, tier 1 operator, helicopter pilot, and he's the one that was picking up these egg-shaped UFOs and things like this for the program. So he can probably give you a better idea on all that. But I did hear about it also, and early on, and when I got introduced into the program, they did ask if I wanted to be part of the retrievals, and that was a big thing. But when I asked them more about it, and they started giving me details about how gory it was, that kind of put me off. And then on top of that, I was kept thinking to myself, as strange as all this sounds, I don't think they could give me enough hazardous equipment, protection gear to make me feel comfortable around this sort of an environment, because, you just don't know what you're dealing with. So I felt very uncomfortable. I just thought, no, I'm not going to do that. So I graciously said no about the retrievals. But I could have been on the program, but I didn't do that.
Jason, how do you address the skepticism surrounding the extraordinary nature of your claims and the lack of publicly available evidence?
Well, that is something where, there's not a whistleblower around right now that has spoken to Congress that can drag a UFO out of the dark and say, here you go, Mr. President, here's your UFO that everybody's screaming about. That just isn't going to happen. That's why we're coming forward, because we need help to, at least, here, my main thrust at the end of the discussion, when Congress had all finished talking to me, and I got to sum it all up, and I just said, in the very least, this program has been running for about 80 years. Don't you think it's time we did an assessment and went to every site that you've been told about and actually review what they have and make sure that every door is opened and you have full awareness and transparency? That's what I left them with. And that's what I'm pushing for, is that I'm not pissed off at program people. I'm not pissed off at Congress. What I do want is a common ground where the program people and Congress can finally get enough transparency to where everybody's comfortable. And also, I think it's completely within the program's ability to tell us that we're not alone, without talking about all the weapon systems that are classified. If they could just come forward and say, yeah, we're not alone, it'll get a huge monkey off their back, and the public will stop, hounding them, and they won't have to, spend all this money on doing, deceptive narratives and hiding, and all the money that's involved in doing this kind of deception kind of stuff, which they've had to do over this 80 years. I mean, you get a huge monkey off their back if they would just admit we're not alone. And I think that's the other big thing that I'm pushing for as well.
How has your disclosure impacted you both personally and professionally?
Oh, boy. Well, I still had my clearance back in 2023, but my car had been broken into 3 different times at the NSA parking lot, which, if you've ever worked there, you can't just walk into that parking lot. It's got gate cards and everything else. You have to have a clearance to get there. So it was obviously somebody in government was getting into my car and letting me know that they had been in my car, because I'd get out to the parking lot and my car door would be, partway open. And it would look like nothing happened. So there's nothing taken or anything else, but, at least as far as I knew. So that happened 3 times. That's when I started going, but they still hadn't messed with me. And then I ended up working another job for the Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary of Defense. And that's when my clearance got messed with. I haven't gotten it back yet. I've had friends talking to me about, them looking into systems. They say my clearance is still there, and all that needs to happen is for me to get hired by a corporation to reactivate it. But I've had at least 3 other corporations look at me and wanting to hire me, but for some reason, nobody is passing them my clearance, which is causing me to not have a job. So it's been a really rough time. So I've lost my clearance, lost my job. It's been about 8 months now, and it's getting really tough. So yeah, it's not been a fun ride.
Before I get you out of here, Jason, I wanted to ask you about memory drugs. You've mentioned them before and how they were administered to you personally. How did they alter your recollection of events after you took these memory drugs?
I only recall them injecting me once. And yes, it was kind of like, it felt to me an awful lot like, a Twilight drug, like the ones you get when you're, doing an upper GI kind of a scope being shoved down your throat to look at your stomach. And they give you an injection that kind of makes you wink out and you don't remember the whole thing. That's what it feels like. But I only had that happen once, and that was at the very end of me being in the program.
I can't let you go without asking you about reptilians. I know they were a sensitive topic in the program. Why is that, and what do you know about their role?
Well, it was either the topic of reptilians was either very clandestine and very, very secretive, and or there was some other motivation, like perhaps these were, an aggressive race of beings or reptilians. I don't know which. I can't vouch for that, so I'm not going to argue with anybody on, are these truly evil or not? But I have read up, and I've got, since I've been public, I got tons and tons of people telling me their stories, and they pointed me to some really good research on reptilians. And apparently, from what I've heard now, that there's more than one race of beings, apparently, that people, regularly report being abducted by. And they're not all reptilian, so to speak. One of them is like a gray type being that has what looks like, scales, like a reptilian would. And then there are these really friendly types of reptilians, and I think an amphibious race as well that looks reptilian. And then there's this other kind of bloodlust, evil-minded type of reptilian race. So it may be that reptilian race that's very evil is the one that may be being talked about and being hushed up. But these other ones might also be the ones that they're talking about. So that's all I have about the reptilians, is that only after I was outside the program did I read up on this, and other people were telling me from their own experiences that these are the types of reptilians that we've encountered, or part of the reporting that has been coming out in the UFO community.
Looking back on everything you've seen or encountered, Jason, if you had the chance to speak to any of these non-human entity beings, what would you ask it about humanity's place in all of this, and how do you think that answer might alter the way you view yourself and your role in the program?
Yeah, I'd probably ask more about, how long have you been here, and how come, there's eyewitness reports coming out even thousands of years ago and even up to today. Yeah, what is the purpose for you being here for this long? I mean, have you been helping us, or have you just been observing us? And that's what I really would like to get down to the, nitty gritty on, is that, what is the nature of their wanting to interact with us? It seems to me that a lot of abductions are very benevolent, and people actually come away saying they've cried sometimes because it was such a lovely or loving experience. And then there's these other ones that end up being like complete horror shows. So I'm a bit confused about, is that because of the differences in the beings that are being approached or during these abductions, or is it something else? So that's the big first pressing question I would ask them, is what's your purpose here? And amongst all the other races that are here observing us here on this planet, is it all the same, or are we looking at a whole bunch of different agendas, and you all have, something that you're doing here? Because realistically, I believe that there's a bunch of different races, and that they all might have different agendas here. Some might want research, some of them to observe, some of them might want to take some of our resources off the planet, maybe a whole multitude of things. So those are the kind of things I'd be asking.
Jason Sands is my guest on Massacre Radio, wrapping things up. Jason, just a few more questions. You've been reluctant to talk about any weapons or technology you saw while in these missions. Can you instead maybe talk about how they trained you to identify when standard military equipment might fail against UFOs or NHIs, or any situations that made it clear to you?
Oh, that, well, yes, it is classified, but I'm sure that the military always has to look through the lens of everything is a threat, okay? So I know that they have probably used some of these technologies to try to defend against what might be an off-world threat. And like I said, if they are aware that there are other races and that all of them are pretty well good to us, but then there are a few races that they know are a big threat, I would say that, yeah, it would be prudent to create some kind of defense. And in my estimation, I'd say that we're hundreds of years ahead from what the public understands, and maybe even our adversaries understand. We're way ahead than they think they are, than everybody thinks they are.
Jason, you've advocated for amnesty for whistleblowers in the past. What specific protections did you propose to Congress, if any, and did they show any willingness to act on it?
I thought when I looked at the NDAA of 2022, that's the one I had any input on, that the verbiage needed to be very exact about, the whistleblower protections. And then on top of that, we discussed, okay, if we want to, say we actually do find some material, what are we going to do with it? We had to set that up because you're talking about private industry like Northrop Grumman and things like this, that, whatever state you're in, you're going to have to, abide by the local law enforcement folks and authorities. So you can't just, jump into that without having some problems. So those are the kind of things that I was talking to them about.
Jason, is there anything else you'd like to add before we get you out of here?
No, just we need your support as well. Just keep doing what you're doing out there in the public. The way I look at it, our country here in America, I think the people have been the one miracle we've had. Every time we're faced with something horrible, somehow the people pull together and we get this done. So I'm asking everybody there that whatever you do, just continue to support us. That really means a lot.
Absolutely. Go check that out, folks. Jason, thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, sir.
Massacre Radio.
Thanks again to my guest, Jason Sands, for making the time. Real interesting stuff. That about does it for me. We'll reconvene and do this all over again next week. Got some great guests lined up for future episodes, so you don't want to miss that. Make sure you stay tuned. As always, I've been your host, Members Only Dave, and I'll be seeing you.